on. Is it Tuesday at 2 p.m.? It's the ROMKids Show. Nice to see everyone. This is the Royal Ontario Museum's distance learning program here Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Each week we bring you a special guest, an activity, a theme, and we explore it with a lot of fun, a little bit of silliness, and hopefully we get to be engaging with each other. Last week, if you joined us, we had Emily, who's a project manager at the Royal Ontario Museum, and she talked to us about how big giant exhibits get installed at museums and what all the process is, how many people take part in that sort of thing. We also made, we mummified apples, because our very special exhibit right now at the ROM is our mummies exhibit. So we mummified an apple, and in a few weeks from now we'll look into it and we'll see how our mummified apple is doing. The week before that, we had Sebastian on, who is a scientist here at the museum who studies invertebrates, and we talked all about coral reefs and how we're actually updating our coral reef exhibit right here, or display right here at the museum. Today's episode is sort of similar to that. Last year, about this time, we updated our tree cookie display. And there's a lot of important things about that. So on today's episode of the ROMKids Show, we're going to have a very special guest, Jeanette. Oh man, it's such a good name. I'm gonna get back to that one. We're going to have Jeanette on to talk about truth in the museum, and how we can update exhibits, and how we can be sort of honorable and thoughtful about things. I think we are now at the theme song portion of the event. Here we go. Welcome to the ROMKids Show with me. We'll do some crafts and tell some stories. Let's talk about science, art, and history. Welcome to the ROMKids Show, starring you and me. There we go, theme song portion of the event out of the way. We have important things to talk about. Let's move right on over to our art table, where we are going to make these, okay? So this is, shout out to a longtime fan of the show, Remy. I made sort of a tree ring handprint, okay? And so what are we talking about when it comes to tree rings? We're talking about these. You ever seen one of these before? It's a tree cookie. It's like the center of a tree. If you cut it in half, and you can see a whole bunch of rings, such as these. And each one of those represents 1 year in the life of a tree. And we're going to get back to that in a second. But for today's project, we are going to be making sort of tree rings out of our hands. And each ring we do on the inside represents one of our years, okay? So that's going to be a lot of fun, and we're going to be able to sort of tell the story of our life. But with that, we have a lot of special things going on here on the show. We have our good friend, Jeanette. Cool, I did it in the end. As you can see, we're all learning Zoom across the world. It's in the news a lot. Okay, Jeanette, you are here with us today. I'm very excited to have you. Now, I spent a lot of time rehearsing your last name. We both have really long last names, which is really fun. When I was little, people used to like to say that my last name was taller than I was. So my last name is Mukherjee, which is really great. And so I was doing some rehearsal today, because you have a wonderful long last name, gorgeous last name like me. Can I give it another shot? It's AyAyQwaYakSheelth.
Exactly.
I did it. I did it, everyone. We can all learn long last names. They make us who we are. Jeanette, thank you for joining us today on the ROMKids Show. We have a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about tree cookies, tree rings, and how we can sort of adapt exhibits at the museum, and how that's really, really special. Now, Jeanette is our Indigenous Outreach and Learning Coordinator here at the Royal Ontario Museum, which is a really, really special job, I think. She has a team of Indigenous knowledge teachers which sort of activate our galleries, which is really special, can pass on learnings from their societies and their communities, which is really cool, and bring some traditional learnings and history to how we teach here at the ROM. Another thing that you do too that I think is really special is you work with a lot of our exhibits to make sure that they sort of reflect an Indigenous perspective where that works. Can you tell us a little bit more about your story while I get started on my tree ring, which is literally a piece of paper and a marker?
I hope you don't get a cramp with all the number of rings that will add up to your age there. Like, the older we get, that's a lot of tree rings.
I'm pretty old. I'm
Well, I'm
33.
that you've got such a successful art project for people to be working on while we're talking, because I love to keep my hands busy when we're talking. But today I'm very excited, as Kieran mentioned, my name is Jeanette AyAyQwaYakSheelth. And sometimes when you have a name that long, and mine has 17 letters, it means something. And my name truly does mean something. It means one who gives away and still stands tall. So I'm very excited. As Kieran knows, that as an Indigenous person, I go out of my way to also acknowledge the homeland that I'm on. So thanks to the Anishinaabe, Mississauga, Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat for allowing me to be a guest on their lands, because I come from 3,000 kilometers away. I
Whoa.
don't know if anybody else knows how that feels, but that's a long way away. So my home is in British Columbia, where this tree cookie we're talking about today comes from. And my home, you can see the ocean. And I grew up being told if you could see out into the Pacific Ocean forever, we would see Japan. And we tried so hard every time we looked out at the ocean, because we hoped to see Japan, because we always knew Japan shared our ocean.
I think
So we
that's in
always looked really hard from the beach.
I know growing up in Toronto, because we're the Royal Ontario Museum, in Toronto living on the lake, I remember being young and looking over that lake and being told if I look hard enough, I'm going to see New York, I'm going to see America. So that similar feeling, but of course yours is even bigger. Tell us a little bit more.
Well, sometimes I live a block away from Lake Ontario, and sometimes if I squint my eyes just right, I pretend the clouds are really mountains in the distance, because that's one thing I miss from home is all the mountains that sort of hug us. Like, I come from a valley. We know it now as the Port Alberni Valley, and that's the home of the Tisha. There are 14 different communities in my New Channels nation. So I'm a New Channels woman. I come from one of those 13 communities called a How's It. And I like to say, a how's it going?
How's it going? Yeah.
A how's it? So now you know how to say a how's it. And I know sometimes, children who are watching might like have big names like ours, and sometimes it could be stressful because we have to repeat ourselves, or people might not have heard the names of our homes. But sometimes if we find fun or playful ways to say it, like a how's it going, it might help people soften up. And a little chuckle usually helps people remember things.
I
So
know
I
that when
come
I
from
was growing up, I really struggled with reading and spelling. And then the reading came pretty fast, but then I could not spell my last name. It took me until grade 6 to learn how to spell my last name, so I totally get it. We want to say very quickly hi to Isaac and Sarah in the audience today. Big fans of ROMKids, Summer Club regulars. Today, Jeanette, we are talking about our tree cookie here at the museum, but we're also talking about truth. We're talking about community. Very quickly before we dive in, I wanted to talk a little bit about trees, okay? Very quickly, I want to talk a little bit about trees and what dendrochronology is, okay? Which is a big word that in, I guess, what, ancient Greek and Latin, dendro sort of means tree, chrono, the chrono part of that means time, and then the ology means the study of. So it's the study of trees and the study of time in trees. So we have right here, here is our tree cookie, which is like really, really big. It's like 500 years old. It lived for a really long time. And then you can see a little bit more clearly here a bunch of lines, okay? And each line represents 1 year. The lines, the circles in the middle of the tree, closest to the center, are the oldest ones. So the first ring would be when it was essentially born, okay? That first year of life. And then as you get farther and farther out on the tree, the ones closer to the edge, those are the lines that are a lot younger. So in the middle it's old, and on the edge it's young. And what we know from studying these lines and from studying trees is that while each line can be is 1 year, the distance and sort of the thickness of the line can tell you the health of that year. Okay, so if the lines are really close together, that means that it wasn't as healthy a year. You know, there wasn't as much water, there wasn't as much sun. But if the lines are thicker and farther apart, that's a really healthy year. Okay, in the same way that we can think of like bears during like this season right now, they eat a lot of fish, they eat a lot of food to bulk up. So if it's a really good season, those lines are going to be farther apart and they're really going to bulk up. But we're not specifically here to talk about the lines on the tree. We're here to talk a little bit about something else. Tell us why we're talking about the tree cookie today.
Well, we're talking about the tree cookie today because one of our Indigenous, specifically Cree community members, because our conversation is already telling us we're not all one Indigenous group. So Indigenous peoples are the first peoples that lived in this land, and there's at least 65 different distinct nations across 3 oceans. We have 3 big oceans that represent this country. So I come from very far away, and I work here in Toronto now, and we listen to one of our community members, Stan Wesley. I think you might even remember Stan from this big reveal we had last year, because Stan came to us at about 2016, exactly right.
He's a good guy. He dresses really well.
He dresses very well, and I think you two had matching colors last year.
Yeah, we looked handsome up there. To be fair, we all looked very handsome that day.
Very, very handsome. Bigger picture is Stan brought to our attention on social media, so people might know what Twitter is, and he drew attention that in the middle of this tree ring, way back in 1920, when this tree ring came into our museum from the University of Toronto, someone made the tree ring into art, and they, you know, like what you're talking about with the new word you introduced to us. What's it called again?
Oh, dendrochronology.
Dendrochronology. So someone took advantage of that idea of dendrochronology, but made historical moments that are all based on Western history. And at the time, there was still this belief that Christopher Columbus discovered America. Well, America is a long way away from the tip of South America. Let's just start there. Mm-hmm. Christopher Columbus was super duper lost. He was on his way from Spain looking for India, which is a completely different continent. You know, and the older you get and learn about maps in schools, or you might even see maps in storytelling, we all live on one, I think is it 7 altogether continents on the planet. So Christopher Columbus, way back in 1492, was looking for India and bumped into South America, and the statement is incorrect. Christopher Columbus did not discover America. Christopher Columbus bumped into South America and went back to Spain and to the world that he comes from, explaining that he found a new world, and then we start a whole new relationship with the church and with explorers who describe the doctrine of discovery that says we can claim new lands if there are no Christians. And so a lot of Indigenous people didn't have a Christian belief or churches built or all those kind of things. So what happened was Stan Wesley, who's in the picture that Kieran has, asked us to correct this it's not a truth. So when it's not a truth, it's a lie. At the time, someone believed it was true, and fast forward in history, we really know a much bigger picture of what happened in history. And because Indigenous people were seen as very civilized, and they were soulless and needed to be saved, and we didn't write things down the way Western culture does. We tell our stories through telling stories and songs and such, that we were not as respected throughout history. So fast forward, we have a responsibility to take care of the memories inside of this building. So we had this conversation, getting ready for today, Kieran.
So some really key things here that we sort of need to acknowledge when it comes to discovering North America and Christopher Columbus is that Indigenous communities and societies, they've done incredible things here going back an incredibly long time, far before Christopher Columbus and many of those explorers found their way to the shores that we're living on today. We also know that indigenous societies all through North and South America and really all across the world, but when we're talking about like North America, indigenous groups are also independent of each other. You know, they have different languages, different histories and cultures, and that's something really important too. These are groups that have been here for an incredibly long time, that are distinct and are still here with us today. And that's something that we're trying to sort of fix when it comes to the tree cookie, is we want to not disrupt and distract from the histories of people that have been here for such an incredibly long time.
I think that's what makes it important that we fix the tree cookie with, because, like you say, you can't discover something that wasn't lost, because the people that were living here weren't lost, so we weren't found. But you can't discover something when it already existed. And
Yeah.
that's what you're saying, Huron, that indigenous people have been here since the beginning of time. And even our modern day science will tell us, with, you know, the way you study trees and how tree passes through time. Geologists also study rocks in the passage of time,
Mm-hmm.
and how long people have been here. And there is more and more scientific Western evidence that show indigenous people have been here since the beginning of time. So that's why we had to speak truth inside the ROM about the tree cookie. So we have an Indigenous advisory circle, and I'm holding my feather because I have an eagle feather in hand, and I wore my eagle feather earrings on purpose because Indigenous culture used art to help us remember knowledge, because we're an oral culture. So I wanted to wear my eagle feathers so that I speak truth. And I'm holding a tobacco tie, which is also a tradition from this region. And I might not be from here, but sometimes you learn from other cultures, and I follow the traditions here. And the truth of like holding on to this tobacco is something we prepared uh, because we wanted to correct this, and we shared this tobacco with our guests at the ROM so we could have Stan Wesley speak up. And it took a long time, because sometimes truth, even the truth, is symbolized by turtle. If you put your hand over your stomach and go like this, that's how you say turtle. And the turtle represents truth, because on the back of turtle, right, there's marks on the back of turtle. There are marks, and there are always 13 marks on the back of turtle in the turtles in this region, because that marks what happens each full moon. It's a truth. And not everybody will share the same things that happen on a full moon, because it's based on the land you live in. So some people might be having fish in March in full moon because fish are moving. But some people might still be telling stories because there's snow on the ground. But these full moons become a calendar for many land-based cultures. And that's not just indigenous cultures. So turtle tells us to speak the truth. The turtle reminds us that truth helps us to slow things down. Does anyone ever remember a story where someone won a race and they were a turtle?
Yeah.
Because turtle reminds us getting somewhere fast isn't always going to get you the results you want. So we took a long time, 3 years, with Stan Wesley helping us, reminding us and encouraging us to speak the truth, to change this exhibition. And one of our ways we did that is we talked to our advisory group we call Indigenous Advisory Circle, and they said we can't change somebody else's art, just like your handprint today. Even if even if you wanted to be younger than you were, and you put less rings on there, and I look at it and you can say I'm really only this age, we know it's not true.
Mm-hmm.
If we know how old you really are. So just because you want to be younger doesn't make your tree, right, your art true today. But because that's your art, I it would be rude of me to come and change it, wouldn't it? If I came and drew on your art, in sign language, if you pinch your cheek, that means rude.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to be
That's
rude
very
and
rude,
write
yeah.
on somebody else's art. So our elders also said we can't be rude and change the art. But we told a better story about where this tree was born, where it grew up, and whose homeland it was on. And that's why we brought up Tishot and Neutronos, because that's the nation that this tree, as an example, would have grown in a rainforest like in Tishot. So Tishot helped us tell a more truthful story about this tree and its beautiful West Coast ecosystem that it lives in.
I have a picture that I'm throwing up right now of that ecosystem. Now, one of the really cool things about this project of refreshing the exhibit to better reflect like our ideals and things that we know to be true today is that you got to go back to the West Coast, which is where you're from, and you got to go to this community. Can you tell us a little bit about what it's like over there and what maybe that tree would have been living through?
Well, I think what's beautiful about going back home is that I get to hear the voices of my community now in the walls of the ROM. So when the ROM is open and we go by the Earth Ranger studio, and that part of our museum is open to the public again, we get to hear the voices of people that I grew up with or people I've learned from. So to me, that's a special part of this whole project is that our nocturnal voices get to live on inside. And it's our community speaking truth about how important this tree was. And one of our elders would say, even though we might not have cut down a lot of trees, we cut down what we needed. We didn't take all the trees, we only took what we needed. But the other thing he said was that we might have used trees like cedar that for more important things, like long houses and other things. But what was special about this type of tree is the reason why the one of the pictures we do have is the tree it is good for burning in a longhouse. If you could imagine like 8 families and all their kids living in one big longhouse, we would need a fire pit to warm us. And what was beautiful about this wood is it didn't make a lot of smoke. I don't know if anybody's gone camping or visited an urban fire pit lately, but it can get really smoky sometimes. And Indigenous people are like scientists. They pay attention what is too smoky. And if you've got 8 families living in a house that relies on a fire pit to keep warm, you don't want your fire pit to be smoky or full of ash. So to this day, especially where all night ceremonies, this Douglas fir, the same that this tree cookie is grown from, is special for those ceremonies because then people aren't like going like this all like full of smoke when we have the fire lit up, right? Because it's not going to be smoky. But the pitch was also important. Like imagine this tree with 8 adults hugging it. If you want to know how big these trees are, you want to know where they live, that's a visual.
That's so
If
big.
you
8 people hugging a tree.
8 people hugging one tree with our arms out, that's how big the trees are back home. And because Douglas fir wasn't a fancy tree that the logging industry cut down, the trees are even bigger now, Kieran, because they've been growing so long. And the logging industry, they didn't see the same value like cedar, and they've almost wiped out the poor cedar. But the other, like one of the other things, the video, when you get a chance to see it, is one of the links we'll share. One of the video pictures is a drone. I've never seen a drone used before, but our filmmaker used this camera that took the entire length of a picture, and it's what you have to wait till the end of the video to finally see how tall it is. It's like as tall as one of our buildings here in Toronto. Like you look up and you get dizzy. Like, and that's a whole forest of looking up if you want to know. Like when I visited BC with my children, my littlest boy, Taliesin, was 4 years old, and he spent most of his visit looking up. And I looked up to see what he was looking at, and he was just looking at all the trees and everything that we would never see in the city. But the same way we look up in the city and see skyscrapers, back home, you're walking through a forest being towered over by these big trees.
I'm a big fan of Taliesin because he's always so expressive about the way that he like interprets the world around him. Big fan of that guy. Very quickly, we've been talking about these are rings. These are rings to my hand. Okay.
Wow.
I'm sort of cheating a bit here because I didn't fit all 33 of me in. But you can see on my very first ring, the ring on the very center, just like a tree, that's my first year. Okay. That's me being born. And then as I go on, I can add in other things. So for example, on the one I did for a fan of the show, Remy, I put age 1, Remy is born. Age 2, Remy's monster trucks phase begins. Age 3, Remy, what did he do? Oh, fell in love with Coke and Mentos, which is obviously a thing that we love very much on this show. Can you? We're getting close to the end. Jeanette, can you tell us what are some things that would appear on this tree cookie if it wasn't sort of trying to tell the history of the world, and primarily the European world, but was instead telling the story of the forest where it grew up?
Well, I think it would go back to the beginning of time, where you know, back to our creation stories of coming from the ocean onto land through Entenmannk, which was part of a mussel shell. So just that journey from our creation story, that's where this tree would begin. You know, in my visual creation, I think, you know, 5 to 7, 800 years ago, it would be a thriving West Coast culture of New Toronto whale hunters that lived off the land, and those whale hunters would travel from all of our names among New Torontos have AHT on the end, and I'm told that means place. So a house it means sheltered place. So history makes it look like Indigenous people might not have lived anywhere, but we moved where the food was.
Mm-hmm.
We moved where the water and the shelter was. So we might have winter homes and, you know, different places where we would hunt, and it would be better weather for us for different reasons. But fast forward, right? You could also see other things in there, like the first arrival. Captain Cook was the first one that got lost in our region, and he kept coming back.
Mm-hmm.
So Captain Cook was the one who changed the place we know as Yuquat to Friendly Cove. So that's a very, very famous place on a western map of James Cook discovering the Nootka. Mm-hmm. We weren't lost, and we were always there. So
doing
we
just
even
fine.
didn't have one name. So you could fast forward to the 1970s, even a little bit, right? To go to that, we changed our name. But you have to go back a little bit of time because, you know, residential schools happened, our language was outlawed, didn't get the right to vote. Like, you could put lots on that tree that shows a lot of the ways Indigenous people were really pushed aside because history thought we were going to disappear, and we never did. I'm really happy to always get a chance to work with you on this show or on these projects, Kieran, and I hope people have fun tracking their tree rings and playing with telling their own story about all the things that make the stories of their life worth retelling. Good memories.
Good memories, important things. You know, a reoccurring thing on this show over the last couple episodes is that museums can change with the times, and they can adapt with the times. Because, you know, when we look at science is something that we're always refining. We're always learning more. We've learned so much about dinosaurs just in the last 20 years. That's far different than what we knew 100 years ago. So things have changed so much over time. And it's great that we're able to adapt our exhibits and our displays because we're learning more and more. And so this project, you know, the Tree Cookie project on the ROM was one example of that. Oh, this is such a cool thing to do. Thank you for sharing this with us. Thank you for having us with us. This is really special. It's nice to be able to talk as a community about these things. So Jeanette, thank you for everything you've done on at the museum. I always really appreciate it. Jeanette does really important work too, like talking to our staff about Indigenous history, primarily in what's now Canada. And that's a really important thing for all us to know because a lot has happened that doesn't always get to the front of the newspaper. And that's something that we really need to uncover and use that to highlight in our museums, in our exhibits, and in our displays. Next week, a very different topic. We're learning about creepy crawlies with a scientist from the museum, Antonia. We're going to talk about all sorts of insects and maybe how they're not that creepy because it's our Halloween special episode next week. This episode will be online by the end of this week. We're going to have the video that we showed today so you can get to know this community and their art and their trees and their forests and their culture. And you'll have more information about everything that we did on our show. Jeanette, thank you so much. That was really special. Thank you to our producer, Courtney. Thank you to everyone at home. Stay safe, wear a mask. We love you. See you later, everyone.